Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here today with a panel of international executives to talk about global perspectives on sustainable manufacturing. Recognizing that we're in constant flux of change with labor shortages that existed pre-pandemic and the turmoil of logistics and supply chain disruptions with rising costs is a difficult world for all, but especially for our leadership and the decisions that come on the plate without much time to react. This sets the stage to our discussion today. A warm welcome to all of our panelists. Joining us from Chicago, Illinois is Chris Baby, CEO of SureWorks. From New Zealand, CHEP Country Manager Mike Lewis, and Ryan Nielsen, Vice President of Operations at PFG Glass right here in British Columbia. Welcome all. In this international keynote session, we have invited our panelists to share their perspectives as they journey through the challenges and opportunities in leading a business forward as our economics and economies recover and businesses reset in the waning days of the pandemic. So moving right into the discussion today, because I know there'll be questions at the end, and I get you thinking throughout our discussions for this next hour and 15 minutes. Chris, this last year and a half has been quite an experience, and I was able to attend your session earlier today. Very, very interesting journey that your organization has been through. As you look to the future now, what are some of the key impacts on your business operations and priorities at SureWorks?
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, it's been I think we've had a unique front row to the pandemic. Not only are we a manufacturer like many on the webinar here today or on the Zoom call, but we also produce PP products that were needed during the pandemic. So it's been a crazy 2 years. I think, it's funny, I was thinking a little bit about what's new to us as leaders of organizations. And I mentioned this in the other session. I think we're adding virology to the list of safety hazards that we all have to deal with day in, day out. And I think if you would have asked me that 2 years ago, I would have probably laughed at you, Lisa, because it just wasn't part of our risk assessment, hazard assessment in our work lives, and then in our home lives too, right? And I think, it's funny as I watch things unfold and, vaccinations rolling out across, I still look at, you're doing your own personal risk assessment when you're thinking about vaccinations, right? I think sometimes people lose sight of that fact. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to weigh the risks of protecting yourself. Moving forward, I actually think we're going to have a relatively different future than what we came from. I think the pandemic has probably shaken the foundations of the global network, supply chain, and I think labor in general. I think as we looked at globalization and just in time and offshoring of manufacturing, I think we're looking back, all of us now, saying, wow, we left ourselves very vulnerable in certain circumstances, whether it be being able to protect our frontline workers, whether it be having availability, and we talked about this at the other session, availability of things like vaccines in our local countries that we operate in, because if you don't have it, you're beholden to your neighbor. Canada was beholden to the US, and I've, just about 2 hours from me in Kalamazoo, Michigan, we've got the largest Pfizer factory in all of the US, and the US would not open up that access to Canada until they were ready. So that was that again lays on a challenge that we need to think about moving forward. I think probably the most surprising thing that has hit me here over the last, call it 4 to 6 months, is how much disruption is coming in the supply chain as we walk our way kind of to what I think is the tail end of the pandemic phase into what I think is going to be an endemic phase. I did not foresee, as demand ramped up and as we shut down all manufacturing essentially around the world, or we throttled it back, and trying to bring it back up and in sync with the demand that's pouring out. I did not anticipate some of the challenges. And I think everything from raw materials to labor to all of these things, I think are going to drive us to, one, think about things like automation. How do we manage our workforces? There was another session I was on earlier talking about hazards today in our workforce is if we have this great resignation, as they're calling it, of 40% of our workers across all of our organizations in the coming year, man, that's going to put some strain on our health and safety of all of our organizations, because as you move people around, you lose some of that knowledge and that acumen within your organization. So I see that as a challenge moving forward, Lisa. So I think things are going to be quite different actually coming out than we went into the pandemic.
All excellent points, Chris. When you think about thinking of workers choosing their employer as opposed to employers choosing their workers, I mean, this is a shift when you talk about health, safety, and well-being, and it's at the very core of culture. So excellent. Thank you. Ryan, moving on to Ryan, and please feel free to talk, about your business as well to introduce yourself, Ryan. What are some of the most significant takeaways that you have made from the pandemic, and as you also look towards the future at PFT Glass?
Yeah, we are a glass manufacturer, so nobody in Canada actually truly makes glass. So we have to buy glass from other parts of the world. One of our main partners is through the US, as well as into Asia. We run 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. In terms of how our business kind of works, we're kind of the beginning user. So we basically supply the construction industry. We're kind of at the first stage. So you make raw glass and you have to manufacture it into a state to get it into the building, and you're selling it to people who are installing it into those buildings. So in terms of how we kind of work, or the importance of what we are, we have customers that have anywhere of up to 200 or 300 employees, job sites, schools, hospitals, municipal buildings, all that sort of stuff. So kind of an important, so the stress in terms of us to keep kind of, when the pandemic kind of hit, was difficult. How we kind of look now at the pandemic, looking back, some of our takeaways, it's still kind of always evolving. There's never really truly a takeaway. We're all kind of learning. Every day it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. I kind of look at the pandemic as a way of, like you guys all mentioned, like Chris mentioned, we're changing how we kind of look at things. It gave us an opportunity. It really kind of slowed down manufacturing. It halted the economy, or even the world, and basically put us into a state of almost hibernation that none of us have really ever had to experience, as things have moved so fast. And so for us, I kind of look at it in terms of, it's given us all an opportunity to kind of reset, reevaluate. How are we moving forward? Does it allow us, the pandemic kind of really made us realize, okay, what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses, and how do we have to change, and what kind of tools do we need to go moving forward? What does that do to our workforce? What does that do to our team members? What does that do to our workers? And, all those kind of things you're constantly evaluating. You're always trying to figure out, and are we using new words? Like, as leaders, we're trying to adapt. We're having to make decisions faster and quicker. And we're realizing that some of those decisions are maybe sometimes uneducated, Lisa. And the fact that we don't have all the points yet, because it's always evolving, it's always coming through. This is something nothing of us has kind of gone through. So it's really challenged us as leaders. And through that, you're going to make mistakes, but you have to realize that. And I think that that's something as a leader, one of our biggest takeaways, that we have to realize that if we make a mistake, that's okay. We just need to make that change as quickly as possible. Our everyday change prior to the pandemic was, we're working on business, supply chain, we're just going through our everyday. And then the pandemic hits, and here we are, having to completely change focus and trying to find a way of, okay, now we got to keep our team members safe. How are we doing that? How do we get through it? And then supply chain coming through, like, things of people hoarding from, masks to PPE equipment and all that, and then trying to have that all kind of calm down. These are all some of our biggest takeaways for us at our company. And we're constantly sitting there evaluating and changing. Do we need more training? Do we need more education? Do we need more support? And these are things that you have to act quickly on and get it going in order to make the workforce feel safer, feel more comfortable, and trying to create a new normal or some sort of calmness throughout the whole thing, and not overreacting. And I think that that's, media plays a part of that. And I feel like Make It Safe, or, the MSABC putting this kind of stuff on, really allows us to sit down as a group and discuss together and make more of a calmness and rationalize things a little bit more and realize an open communication, because that's something that I think that we really need moving forward.
Excellent, Ryan. And you brought up some really good points. How do we make decisions effectively, efficiently, with not all the information ideally, available, but then at the same time considering, the consequences of that decision as it relates to the people, because the people enable your business to be successful. So it's a lot, certainly a lot in the leadership, and I appreciate you sharing that with us here. Moving forward with you, Mike, all the way from New Zealand, what are some of the key changes you're planning and making in your business going forward? And how are you supporting your employees through the transition? Welcome all the way from New Zealand. Thank you.
No, thank you, Lisa. I'm fantastic to be part of this. And it's funny, I was thinking last night when we talk about what we're planning for ahead, and I reflected back sort of 12, 18 months to when the pandemic started, and we started doing our planning, and we're all planning for an economy that was going to be, completely into recession, unemployment was going to surge, and all of these things, which turned out to be very short term. And as Chris and Ryan have sort of outlaid, we're dealing with the opposite now of huge surges in demand and changes in our ways our networks sort of operate. And I think that's been one of the themes, when we look to our forward business planning, is this reevaluation of supply chain risk, of volatility, and the so what out of that, of how do we build resilience to it, because it's probably not going to change, or certainly not in the short term. And being a country like New Zealand, at the bottom of the world, we have very little influence over any of these global trends and the ripple effects through to our sort of international supply chains that we rely on so much, either for raw materials and finished goods coming in, or the way we export is only going to increase. And I think two parts that sort of come out of that around that rethinking those supply chains is our relationships. We've always relied a lot on those relationships, whether it's through shipping lines, airlines, overseas partners, in the way that those relationships need to shift from supplier customer to something more based around a deeper level of trust. And we've seen that in different businesses where those relationships that have strong foundations have worked well through this sort of pandemic phase and have probably come out stronger. And the other ones that have been more transactional or in their nature have probably really fallen away and shown some big gaps in our risk assessments, that we just never foresaw, I guess, in a stable environment. So I think that's a piece that we're looking at, as well as I would say many companies across New Zealand, about how we build deeper resilience. The second one that probably is driving our thinking is around understanding our customers' supply chains. I think CHEP, both in New Zealand and around the world, we're that sort of invisible backbone of pallets and boxes that moves a lot of goods, and often it's a normal flow, a stable flow. And again, what we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months is our customers' supply chains have changed dramatically, and our understanding of what that would mean for our own network dynamics, demand and supply responses, probably hasn't been as deep as we need to. And if we're going to build a more resilient business, understanding our customers' supply chains and those upstream impacts will have a lot of effect. How that leads through to our people, I guess, and how we lead our people through that is we're focused a lot on our culture, I guess, longer term. And culture's always been a strong part. And, there's a lot of buzzwords around agility and moving quickly with change. And one we're really trying to focus on now is the resilience of our leaders. So we've seen through a health and safety pandemic response, we've needed resilience of leaders. But now we need that resilience to almost be a muscle we build into our people to deal with what is just going to be increasing volatility is the normal way in which a lot of this day-to-day supply chain operates. And focusing on people's interpersonal and intrapersonality skill set rather than technical training is probably going to have as much value to them as becoming a supply chain project management expert and so forth. So it's early days, but we're trying to focus a lot more on those skill sets of our people. I think, as Ryan alluded to, providing people with the flexibility to sort of test, learn, trial and adapt, and let's not get too hung up on some of the processes, but be clear, I guess, on framing that for people about where we don't want to take risk, and that might be in some of our health and safety, procedural environments and others, but other areas we do want to give them that flexibility to operate, in the moment and what they see in front of them. And again, that's a real cultural element as opposed to a procedural element. I think mental well-being is coming really to the forefront of our health and safety strategy. So I would say we've been very strong in traditional physical health and safety, I guess I would call it, plant operation and stuff. And I think that mental well-being piece shifting from, I guess, traditionally where you're probably focused on the support and reclaim of people to now that foster and protect. How do we actually design success into the way we build jobs, the way we structure work? So we try and design out that risk at that part rather than the way we build mitigations around our support and health and safety systems. And probably the last one that I touched on earlier is around this partnership piece, is a culture and an enabler of how we work with our supply chain. How do we get far stronger at being in partnership, I guess, with customers and working on joint solutions rather than some of that traditional customer-supplier relationship that has limited reach. Again, we've seen some really good examples of where that has gone so well, and the trust is built into quite a different relationship in the last 12 months versus how other ones have probably had limited success. And we've identified we need to enable our people to move through that. That's not something you naturally do. You just send out a memo, I guess, to say, if we're going to work differently, there's actually a lot of backbone that we need to build in helping people understand what partnership looks like, how we measure success, how we reward the right behaviours and so forth. So, yeah, I wouldn't say we've fully understood all these things, but these are some of the emerging things I see in our planning going forward.
Excellent, Mike, and all excellent comments and information. We're all connected, doesn't matter where we are. And as you mentioned, relationships are important. Building trust is building these relationships with people that enable us to do what we do and can do. So, and the culture is foundational to how we operate in our organization. And we depend on positive, innovative culture to enable us to do what we do, connected around the world. So thank you. Excellent. Moving back now to looking at how do we, frontline deal with the staffing shortages. Over to you, Chris. How are you working through with staffing and supply challenges in your business specifically?
Thanks, Lisa. You know what? It's interesting because I get a pretty good perspective, actually, Canada, US, and over in Europe. So, and it's a little bit almost contagious where we started seeing some real challenges in the US first on the staffing side. Now we're really starting to see them, creep their head up in Canada, and all of a sudden now Europe's running into the same issues. And sounds like Mike down in New Zealand, it's no different. Where post-pandemic, or as we come to the tail end, challenges are abound. For us. For starters, we have to keep our wages commensurate with the marketplace, right? So I think we're seeing a dynamic shift in, especially and maybe, I've said to my team, and probably maybe one of the positives that's going to come out of this is that, there was really a disparity on that kind of entry level wage for not just our businesses. In fact, maybe our businesses pay maybe a little better than other businesses like the service industry or the, restaurant, food. But we're seeing all of those wages jump up disproportionately as we come out of the pandemic. And in some ways, maybe that's that's a positive for the overall societal benefits in the developed world, which I think will be good, especially here in the US. I think it'll be great for that group. But we have to make sure that we keep our folks. I've got Amazon. I've got an Amazon warehouse that's right adjacent to ours here. And so, obviously we're competing with the biggest in the world now moving forward. So we got to be competitive on wage, but back to, and I think you mentioned this, Mike, culture, and making sure that we are continuing to build a culture of learning, giving progression opportunities. So we're lucky we've been able to continue to acquire and grow the business, and that continues to promote opportunity for those that want to grow both personally and professionally. So I think that's been important for us to enable what is a relatively low turnover rate at our organization. And then I think the other thing that, and we're all talking about this, is the flexibility to continue to work from home where necessary. Like we all moved working from home to manage the health and safety and try to minimize, a lot of it was trying to minimize exposure to our frontline manufacturing and warehouse workers that had to, they can't work from home. They were servicing as essential services. I think there's this hybrid model of working from home plus having some network and some way to relate back to the office. I'm actually in the office here. I enjoy coming into work. I was like 16 months of working from home. I like to have some interaction with our team, with our warehouse staff, our operations team, our customer service. It just gives me a chance we're human, right? So even though we're sitting here talking on Zoom, there is nothing that substitutes a face-to-face chance to talk to somebody around, maybe it's not even just work, maybe it's around somebody's personal, what's happening with their family, what's happening with their life, kids, maybe they're getting married. Those things are hard to do via Zoom, right? And even though you try, you can't. So I'm a believer there'll be a hybrid. I think we need to have some elements of where we can, getting our employees back to have some connectivity, but I think we need to be versatile. And I think that'll help also to continue to promote and engage our workers moving forward. So that's what I would say on the staffing side. On the supply chain front, I think the pandemic threw us just yet another unforeseen curveball when, all of a sudden it was probably Q2 of this year where everything was looking like, okay, we're going to come out. And then all of a sudden the entire global network fell apart just about everywhere. And I think it's really demand outstripping the supply we have around the world, and how intertwined we've figured out that we are, and how just in time we've become as a global community. And, right now we're understanding the perils of that. So even though my crystal ball didn't work going into 2021, I'm now adapting, and our organization is thinking about, okay, how are we going to manage maybe a little different moving forward? I think we're going to be looking at more onshoring. So there was a real push back in the late 90s, early 2000s to offshore. Let's talk about our business, personal protective products. Almost 90% of those products got moved to Asia, predominantly China. And that was probably the most problematic thing that the developed world ran into during the pandemic. So, just in time and offshoring is great, except when it's not. So I think there will be some move to onshore critical elements. And I think, frankly, to bring back jobs and to create a little more juice in our local economies, and to bring back, some skilled labor. And that may be a challenge. We may find ourselves labor deficient. I think our trades, that's somewhere where we have not focused in North America. Like we see over in Europe, a tradesperson is regarded essentially as an engineer, essentially a technical engineer type thing. We haven't gotten there yet here in North America, but the reality is our trades are as critical and as important essentially as any of our engineers, architects, design. Like we haven't figured that out, but we're going to have to figure that out moving forward. I'm a big proponent of the trade side of things. And I think also automation is probably going to become a more dominant theme too, around, okay, if we can't get the labor for certain things, how are we going to automate to try to compensate for that? Problem is when you're in a supply chain crisis and a crunch where you can't get the automation because it's 18 months out, you have to work your way through that period. But I think that's going to change as I look forward, Lisa, and think about where it's going. And so we're thinking about those things in our businesses, both onshoring some of our manufacturing capabilities. We're lucky. We had a significant amount of our manufacturing, our safety products that we sell in the US, about 50% are made. We're one of the few that had significant, but maybe we're going to move that to 75 or 80% here in the coming years as we look to pull more of that back. And it's become more competitive and more compelling to do so.
Really excellent, Chris. I mean, and I mentioned earlier, workers pulling their employer for the job, knowing that wages are a component, but other things, as you mentioned, culture, and Mike also mentioned that, critical. It's more than the money, right? It's the culture that they come into. And then, of course, it's the investment that the employer has in development, in just, you mentioned flexibility where you can. I mean, there are other things other than the almighty dollar for people being employed today. And that's something we all have to consider as leaders, as executives. Really, really great point. Moving to you, Ryan, what impact are you noticing on your people from those challenges? And what are you doing about it or planning for as a result?
Yeah, I would say that obviously in the beginning of the pandemic, the stress of the unknown of what the future is going to lead, you certainly see that amongst our team members. And then, of course, no different than a lot of other companies, we tried to do as much as we could. We're manufacturing, so we tried to mitigate risk, forced or not forced, but tried to move as many people working from home as much as possible to try and keep them safe. You're just trying to do that. And like I alluded to earlier, we're making decisions quickly and fast, trying to be as agile as possible, not necessarily focusing on the bottom line, just focusing on trying to keep people safe. That was our number one. So out of those two, I still see stress being very, very high. The unknown of what's going to happen or how things move forward, the stress of overall, you see everything from inflation starting to rise, especially here in Western Canada. Homes aren't cheap, rent's not cheap, fuel's not cheap, food's not cheap anymore. Our inflation's at the highest and it's rising higher. I don't think we talk enough about it. It makes it more challenging for people every single day. And then outside of that, now we're starting to have people work from home and they've been away for quite some time. So you're starting to struggle with people feeling disengaged or disconnected with their workforce or with their other team, working peers. It puts another added stress or another component onto that as well. And now all of a sudden here with us in Canada, we're starting to see, okay, we're getting a vaccination rate, but now we're starting to see people who are very close with each other or who had relationships at work are now having a difference of opinion based on, oh, do I get vaccinated or I'm unvaccinated? So you're trying to mitigate that to try and keep teamwork. And I feel that gives us an opportunity as an organization, to show. We talk a lot, especially Chris and Mike did, culture, and I still think that that's a big thing. And I believe as much as this pandemic's been hard on all of us, as an organization or as a leader, you can always sit down one-on-one and show somebody individually that you care and that you're there. And you're only so much as an employer that you can do as an individual. But I truly believe through this pandemic, it's given us an opportunity through an organization. You're right, Lisa, put the bottom line. We're all in business to thrive, to grow. But in the same breath, it's given us an opportunity to sit back, really what's important. And we look at it as an organization that if we didn't have our team and we didn't have our individuals doing what they did during this pandemic, I don't know where, it's not even just from PFG Glass point of view, our supply chain to everyone and how that would have affected everyone else, because we ultimately need to have a job, put food on the table, to put a roof over our head. And I feel that one of the biggest challenges or one of the biggest opportunities in an organization was be able to show how much we care and really take this pandemic by the horns and really react quickly and hold on and believe in processes, believe in safety. And I think you're right, Lisa. People don't necessarily, it's not just about the bottom line. It's not about the dollar. As much as we have to put that all into one shoe, like even as us as an organization, I don't want to just talk about us, but how we've reacted. Okay, can I take away that stress of that inflation? Okay, so across the board, we're all doing well, for the most part. The economy, we didn't think this was going to happen during the pandemic, and we all seem to be busy and prices are rising. Well, pass that on to the team members. Allow them to take a little bit of that stress away. And then the other thing I realized that I think that people don't really want is a gift of time and a gift of support. And these are some of the things that we did as an organization to try and show how much we care, to try and, as a culture building, as an opportunity to grab it by the horns that, hey, it's not just, oh, I want you just to be really good at this one part. I just care how good you are at the job. No, I care about your flexibility. I care about your commitment. I care about the fact that you work so hard day in and day out and that you give up so much to try and do what you do for our industry and for our company. I need to pass that on. And those are some of the things that we're trying to do as an organization as we mitigate through this. Obviously, we have pandemic fatigue. we're trying to build flexibility with our team. I think these are some of the things, trying to support them in guiding them in what's prioritizing, and trying to create efficiencies so that they can kind of deal with the pandemic in a little bit more of an efficient way, probably attack it. Because not only do they have to worry about working at our organization, they have to worry about home life, they have to worry about all these other outside things that I think are all things that we as a company can really do moving forward.
Really great information, Ryan. And I heard resonating throughout your discussion is, empathetic leadership. You need to be able to, really show that you care. We've all had to make difficult decisions as leaders, but how you make those decisions, considering the impact on people, not just the business, is critical. And how we deliver those conversations or information. Again, really, really important.
Yeah, I think it's important, Lisa, because even as Chris alluded to, I think there's going to be a hybrid model coming through, because you have to have that human interaction. It's we as a species that has to be. And I think as a leadership, it's very effective to be out on the shop floor or be out within all your different departments and really being there, having a presence out there and listening to them, and not only just having that empathetic leadership as a whole, but even individually, more so now than ever. And if that creates a little bit more of stress on us as a leadership, if we can create that kind of calmness and resignation and kind of individualize it as much as we possibly can, I think that's really what's going to make us different. Like Chris said, separate me from the Amazons, because it's not just all the Amazons. There's many different businesses, and it gives you an opportunity to evaluate that, hey, am I doing this okay? And it's okay to sit there and say, I'm not great at this, right? Because you're not going to be great at everything, but how can you make it better? And this is an opportunity to do so.
Absolutely, Ryan. People come to work more than a paycheck, and I think you've clearly deliberated on that point. So thank you. Moving over to you, Mike, and really talking more about the supply chain. And Chris, you mentioned in particular having more control, if you can, on the supply chain by potentially being able to access the supply market, closer to your business in the country, if possible. So, Mike, in your business, and perhaps where you are, in New Zealand, no doubt have different perspectives on the supply chain issues. So Chris, Ryan, and other manufacturers are experiencing, they have a different lens, but really hearing from you, can you talk about your particular and unique circumstance being where you are in the world?
Yeah, no, thanks, Lisa. And I guess to give people some context around New Zealand's response to the pandemic since the start has really been one of elimination. So to utilise our isolation, I guess, at the bottom of the world and being an island, and that served us really well in the first 6 to 12 months, I guess, that we shut ourselves off. We put a lot of border protections. Those things have continued, and I guess that's some of the challenges that we're probably now facing into. So when I look at our border, for example, only New Zealanders are still able to come back into New Zealand. We have 14-day quarantines, and we have only about 4,000 hotel rooms a month that are available. So there's a backlog of 40,000 New Zealanders to come back to New Zealand, let alone all the labour that would normally come into the country during that time, and all the skills. And that's a big challenge that's really facing our supply chains around skilled labour shortages. So a little bit different from the 40% resignation, I guess, and some of those challenges that I think also will be in our environment from choice. But some real skill shortages as we figure a path to reopen, which is still looking months away. It's still, we were talking, before we started this call, and New Zealand in some regards was ahead at the start and now is behind in its pandemic response, and everyone's got its own speed it chooses. And those borders are proving some real challenges in supply chains, from, transport and driving through to some very skilled engineering and other roles that are making supply chains also think, I guess, to some of the things that Chris and Ryan have talked about. Well, where do you base your manufacturing capacity? What do you source offshore versus onshore from your raw materials to your finished goods? And how many of these challenges are here in the short term versus what may be a longer term trend. So certainly those border closures are having a large impact on supply chains at the moment, and whereas other countries probably transitioned through some phase of that over the last 12 months, that's really starting to build up as a longer term pressure point. Another one with being isolated at the bottom of the world is around international shipping and airline routes. And again, something that we rely on hugely for trade in and out, and probably took as a given that ships would actually come to this part of the world and that airlines would fly down here. We had 25 airlines probably flying here. We now have 2 or 3 today. And again, a lot of the talk is that shipping lines may not come back to this part of the world in the way they used to, and the same with airlines, because there's just so many other better choices to apply that capacity they've got than down to this part of the world. And again, that's putting some real challenges on how do supply chains interoperate again with the other parts of the world that we are so important to us. And I guess there's a couple of different responses that are being considered both in our business and others is how do you diversify your risk, obviously, and look at other markets and more markets so that you deal with that volatility. And then, as I talked a little bit about earlier, that partnership space, because we also, with our border closures, can't get access into other markets in person, which is so important. So where we relied on a lot of travel to do a lot of business and to build relationships, do we need a different form of partnership in country with a partner to represent us, or building offshore presences where we used to rely on a lot of those different mechanisms of short-term travel? So I think those are 2 that are really standing out at the moment. And the last one I'd probably touch on that I think Chris mentioned earlier was the shift from just in time to just in case is really prevalent. And it's one that's hitting our business because we obviously only have a certain amount of pallets in our pool, and our forecasts generally rely on, some pretty long-standing trends around consumption and movement of goods. And we're now starting to see big changes in both raw materials and finished good inventories for how our customers wish to respond to pandemic risks, because they not only are concerned about some of the international supply chains and the access to raw materials and goods coming into the country, but also if they have a pandemic, if they have cases break out in their production sites and they lose shifts, they lose part of their workforce for periods of time, they no longer can rely on the safety stock that they once used to find adequate to meet their own customer needs, and therefore they're building bigger stock holdings. And again, that's one that we see as being exacerbated, I think, through our isolation at the bottom of the world, and is a bit of a watching brief, I think, as to whether, again, it's a short-term reaction till things normalise a bit into 2022, or whether this becomes a longer-term pattern of becoming more resilient, more self-sustaining in what you do, because probably bringing onshore manufacturing is not an easy one for a country of our size, and exactly the point Chris raised, some of the skill sets that just simply don't exist within our economy. And therefore, there's different strategies, I think, that our isolation, which has served us so well through a pandemic, is going to now need to be a part of our response as we move forward.
Thank you, Mike. Just one added question for you. I mean, with the changes that we're expecting to see moving forward with climate change and policy, how do you think that's going to impact the supply chain? And another question is looking at, the ethical supply chain. Is that something you think that's going to become kind of the main theme moving forward from this pandemic?
Yeah, look, I think sustainable, and if we look back at sustainability, and it probably had that environmental lens to it, where we're now taking a far wider view on what sustainable business means. There is climate change, and there is, the drivers, as you say, that are influencing that, but then there's also the societal sustainability, or the people piece, as well as the community that builds into that well-rounded view on what sustainable business is. How do you ensure you protect your environment and your resources? How do you protect your people and your communities? And how do we build sustainable businesses into that? And I think there's been 10 years of gradual movement, to your point, on things like climate change, but I think you are now seeing quite a shift into those circular type business models that really either push the way in which we think about the consumption of the resources around us, and the way in which that builds resilience into our own business models, through to trying to push even regenerative type models. How do we actually build back better, I guess has been a catchphrase I've seen in many countries around the world, but how do we actually build that deeper resilience of both our businesses into the economies and the environments that we're part of? How do we utilize the resources in a far more reproductive way rather than that straight consumer? And I think it will be a big driver that the pandemic has probably accelerated. I think it was always trending that direction. I think we've now just had an injection of that to move quicker to that.
Absolutely. Our experience, we always do, experience always makes us better, faster. Whether we like it or not, it does. Chris, what do you see as your role as a leader in shaping a sustainable future for SureWorks? Has your view on that changed at all over the past year and a half?
Yeah, I think it has for sure. I think when I think about my role as a leader, really I need to set the vision and give my team the resources to execute upon whatever that vision might be. I think one of the things that, we did quite a pivot, and, I haven't kind of talked about our business and where we came from, but 10 years ago, we weren't in the safety PPE space. We were actually tools and equipment, and we determined that we wanted to not only put the tools and equipment in the hands of those professional end users, but we wanted to outfit them with the safety products that they used. And that was a strategic decision we made because we saw both value and a growing marketplace there. So, I think all of us as leaders sometimes need to do slight pivots of our overall business to make sure that we don't get lulled into where we are today is where we're going to be in the future. Some great examples, I think, of those that have failed. Let's talk about Blockbuster to Netflix as a great example, right? So always thinking about where we're at today and where we're going in the future. I think for me, it's to have a why to rally around for our organization. So, maybe it's easier for our business because I always say to my team, we're lucky because every one of us, doesn't matter whether it's me, somebody in the warehouse, somebody in finance, we're all trying to provide safety products and help to get workers home in the same condition that they came to work. So, that's something that we can rally around as an organization. And sometimes we've got to remind ourselves because we're in the daily grind of doing what we're doing and we're chugging out products and we're trying to scramble to insource our products and bring products from around our manufacturing facilities out to our customers. But what are we really doing? Trying to protect workers. So that's something as a leader, trying to articulate that and have a why we exist as an organization. I think building a world-class management and senior management team is really important because that team ultimately, my job is to build that team to enable us to ensure that we have the team and the culture to be able to do and execute upon our visions moving forward. From an overall, so if we think about that from a sustainability perspective, and it's funny because I was listening a little bit to, as you were talking to Mike, we're talking about, the change in the global landscape from, let's say, global warming or climate change as an example. We have an initiative within our organization. It's an ESG initiative, so environmental, social, and governance, trying to look at how do we better monitor and measure that within our overall organization. And I think all of us are trying to think and do that within our representative businesses. But I think it's kind of an unusual time when I think of let's just stick with the environmental aspect. I don't think anybody's arguing that there's change happening around the globe. I think we all know that. But I think when I look at how we politically have got to the point that we are today, I think we're skipping the step between we are a carbon-based society and we want to go to a much more environmentally friendly based society. How do you get there? So if we've still got 85% of our globe that's running on oil and natural gas and coal and those types of things. We only have 15% of our world running on all of the renewables, wind, solar, and other things. And the wind doesn't blow in the North Sea, and the sun doesn't shine in California. And all of a sudden we're seeing what happens when we don't continue to invest in areas like oil and gas to take us from here to there. And I do think there's a gap in all of our developed economies and our political wherewithal to help us get from here to there. So I think something that's going to be interesting is probably going to drive our businesses. And I think it's probably going to drive inflation and other things moving forward. So that's something that I've been just watching how things unfold post-pandemic and watching gas shortages in the UK and different things like that. It's quite fascinating to see kind of where we're at. We know where we want to get to, but we don't seem to have this kind of middle ground set. And I think that's something as a globe we're going to have to get our arms around. Has my view changed in the last year and a half? I think you mentioned at least the speed and agility. You can never be fast enough as an organization. Like, you have to be the digitization of all of our businesses, and anybody that's listening to us as a panel. One of the things that we've started investing in digital probably about 7-8 years ago, and we are investing even more today. The change in the pace of digitization of all of our businesses is astronomical. And if you're not doing it and you're not there, you're probably not going to be around in 5 to 10 years from now. So I highly encourage everybody to think about that. I think the pandemic has exacerbated that. I think the world's probably much smaller than I realized coming out of the pandemic. We're all intertwined. Here we are talking to Mike, and I see the sun rising in New Zealand. Well, I look out at the rain here in Chicago, and it's like we're sitting next to each other talking, which is fascinating. But we're a small intertwined world. So that's a little bit of something that's changed. I think how we look at some of the workers in society, whether it's in our organizations, and I think I mentioned this before, some of the frontline workers, whether it's healthcare, whether it's somebody working at the grocery store, the critical nature of some of the people in our society, I think, has been flipped a little bit. And I think it's good that has been flipped. We realize how important essential services really are to all of us. That's probably changed for me personally, and I would hope that others feel the same way as well. And the last one, and I'll throw out a little bit of out of left field. I think for all the positive we thought that social media would bring to the world, I don't think we ever anticipated the negative impact it could have on our collective health, both physically and mentally. And I think we're all starting to question that element of what's, over the last 10 years, especially through the pandemic, misinformation. I think that's been a real learning for all of us and our kids that are bombarded, and all of us. It's been something I'm probably thinking a little deeper about today than I did 3 or 4 years ago.
Really excellent points. And especially around their last point on social media and just those kind of discoveries is, we tend to look at the opportunities and really focus on the benefits without at times really looking methodically about, what are those risks and, what is the impact of those risks, and really doing a deeper dive in that, which is like contingency planning, because they're not all positive, and we really have to have good strategies to address those challenges. And we're continuing to explore those today. And as you mentioned, our kids, right? I mean, they are our leaders of tomorrow. And, the generation gap just in the learnings are getting wider and wider. So it's an interesting world. Absolutely. We live in, but as leaders, being able to do so much with less time and to have the knowledge of what we need to make sure that we have on our plate, or at least in our portfolio of understanding the best we can before we make those decisions that have huge impact, to our people. Ryan, do you have a different view of the role of health and safety in the sustainability of your business today than you did before the pandemic?
I would say, Lisa, it's yes and no. I would say no, just because coming back to British Columbia and dealing with MSABC for so long, not being Aussie certified and having that strong foundation and those processes in place, I wouldn't have been able to, or we wouldn't have been able to react to the pandemic as quickly as we possibly could. And I don't think we would have had the skill set personally to keep the workers safe or to keep our team as safe as we did. Our first year and a half of the pandemic, we really didn't have, we negated any issues with regards to the pandemic, which for us was kind of a bit of a success. But outside of that, I would say yes, only in the fact that I think that people now more than ever look at companies and evaluate them and think to themselves, is this somebody I want to work for if they don't take safety seriously? And I think that they make that a major part or a large part of their decisions outside of always the normal stuff in terms of their annual remuneration or right down to what type of job, does it challenge them? Does it satisfy them? Do they enjoy going to that? But I think that now more than ever, I think people are looking at it and realizing that that can really separate you from somebody else in terms of keeping the people safe. Having said that, I think one of the biggest sustainable things that we haven't even touched on the surface, but I know being a part of the MSABC that we've talked about is mental health. And you're starting to see it more and more now. And there are some sad stories out there. I think that we need to get out. We need to start talking about them. I think we need to allow it to be okay. I think we need to allow it to be a supportive thing. And I think that this is something that companies have to put in place to allow people to deal with it, and no matter what capacity that they have. And you don't never know, what people are dealing with outside of work, but if they're not in their proper right state of mind, then they're not being at their best and they're not doing their best. In today's day and age, it's so difficult, especially with our younger generation. They multitask at such a rate compared to us of an older generation, and the things that they have to deal with and the pressures that they have to deal with, like Chris was talking about from social media, is unbelievable. And I think that now we have to shift as a generation, as companies, and give them tools and give them access to be able to deal with that, and give them the tools in order to be healthy, because health and safety just isn't a physical thing. It's also a mental thing. And I think that that's really how we have to look at it moving forward.
That's excellent, Ryan. Two very good themes coming from your conversation. Being system certified. So Mike, OC certified is a health and safety management system certified system in BC for manufacturers. You may be familiar with ISO as being have similarities, right? And certainly Chris knows what OC certified is. Being in BC. Having locations here as well. Absolutely, health and safety system is a mechanism to manage risk well, integrated within your business. We had a session this morning about this and the importance of it, because especially for contingency planning and those being better prepared for those systems functional in place for everything, for communications, for emergency preparedness, all of those things that we need to effectively protect our people and our business. So really excellent, Ryan. And then of course, mental health, absolutely ensuring that we have a program in place to help support the mental health of our people. And that's one of the questions I wanted to start with, the question and answer period. And I will now really invite those in the audience to please feel free to forward your questions via the chat feature. And I'd like to start by asking each of you on the mental health, recognizing that some have declared it the next pandemic by many, and getting your perspective, each of you around the table, on how you're managing through this, both as a leader, knowing that, look at the level of stress that is piling up on the leadership itself, but also throughout the organization through this change. So how are you working through that? Mike?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And as we've talked about, it's not an easy one. I think there's a few things that come straight to mind in that space. Is we've got to create an environment, first of all, where it eventually, because I wouldn't say it's there yet, but eventually becomes a normal conversation. It's a tough conversation. And often it blurs into personal versus, the work environment. A lot of things are, that holistic view is really important, but that's obviously not a space that everyone is comfortable discussing, sharing, or feels a need to. And so I think one is creating the environment. Second, we've tried to prepare our leaders, I guess in the same logic of first aid training, of psychological first aid training, to say you are not an expert, you are not a psychologist, you are not a specialist who can deal with understanding and solving these things, but what are some of the basic tools that people in our business can be armed with to identify early emerging things and then provide the right direction to where support comes from. So I think those are two early things that we're doing in that space. I think the emergence of the hybrid work environment, the work from home, and probably things that we're doing now that we thought 12 months ago that we would take a lot longer to get to, have provided some real benefits, but it's also some real downsides. So we're spending a lot of time about looking at a holistic view again of hybrid working, not just the technology, the flexibility and those things, but what are the other things we need to wrap around that are important for mental well-being, because what we're starting to see is a blurring between personal life and work life that probably already existed, but is almost exacerbated by the flexibility that some of these opportunities are put in front of us. If we're not careful, we'll actually have the same downside impact, I think. So I think we're certainly facing into those. I think there's also a greater community of businesses facing similar challenges, and forums and environments, as you have in Canada, I think are proving really useful. If they're just sharing some very straightforward ideas around different approaches we can take to it, or how we learn off each other, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. So it's almost similar to the physical health and safety journey that's kicking off certainly in our environment, is how do we share these opportunities with each other. So I don't think it's a quick thing that we're going to get our hands around quickly, but I think having an understanding, to your point, that the pandemic was probably the initial health and safety shock, and now we've got a very long path ahead for the mental wellbeing space, and how we face into understanding that is really important.
Absolutely. And it is a lot, as you mentioned, there's a lot to it and a lot to do. And how do you work through those pieces? Because, everything's coming fast to organizations and to leadership, and ensuring that we're being effective with the programs that we implement. That's really critical. Chris, any comments on that before I go to the questions that are coming in?
You know what, I think, Mike, you hit probably every high note perfectly there. So, which is fascinating, as we think about different countries, like you hit them bang on. Maybe just to add the flexibility to support our employees back to the hybrid working. And Mike, you talked about, work is bleeding into family. And so it's hard to differentiate at some points, but giving that flexibility, we have an EAP program that anonymously allows employees to get counseling from professionals. As you say, Mike, we're not professionals, but we could facilitate ensuring that folks can get help, whether it's for work related, or in some cases, and maybe most cases, it's actually family or off work related, but it impacts the work. But I thought Lisa might hit on exactly the right points around trying to manage that moving forward. And I do think it's probably going to be the next wave of challenge that we're going to be against.
No, absolutely. And just, going through all, with the programs, just doing our due diligence to make sure they deliver what we expect. EAP programs aren't created equal, as an example, right? Making sure, what is the experience that those that need the help actually walk through. So those are some of the considerations as we're looking at programs. So the first question really about the new generation coming into the workplace are saying they don't want to work for organizations that do not share their values in areas like sustainability, mental health, and diversity. And we've talked about that. How do you communicate your values to attract new employees? So that's and we talked about the importance of culture. So how do you do that in a brand? Maybe starting with yourself, Ryan. How do you do that in this labor market?
Geez, Lisa, that's a tough question. And that's one that we're constantly evaluating all the time, trying to find a new way to really try and communicate it out there. I hate to say this, to a certain degree, but we use social media. I think that that's probably one of the biggest, strongest tools, because you know what I mean, you can't deny the fact of the power of social media to try and create a brand, to try and create a culture, and to try and get it out there. I think that that's probably our first and foremost, and then directing it through our website and trying to create a virtual understanding of what our process is. We really try to invite people into our process, into our manufacturing, even going to our website. You see that, and then just trying to create the sustainability of what we're trying to do, and realizing that we're not perfect, but do you want to come in and make a change and be something that's positive? And I think that that can really attend to how people are trying to move forward in the younger generation for us.
Well, all good insights. I mean, social media has benefits, as we've seen, and being able to try and get to all those generations, especially, I guess, our youth who use it so frequently. It, really align the values of who you are with where people want to work. So excellent. Mike, do you have any thoughts on, from your perspective on aligning, attracting workers and really being able to communicate your values as a brand, as an organization?
Yeah, I think, it's never an easy one to do simply, but I think, gone are the days when sustainability is a plan within your plans, and doing it, that if sustainability doesn't sit very strongly in your company's purpose, and then is exhibited through the actions that you take of how your operations run, then your values tend to, almost sit in siloed. I think a lot of people are looking for those proof points to say, is it really the way your business behaves? And I guess the way we connect it through to our employees and the proposition to come and work for us is that it's work worth doing. So if you've got work worth doing, so you can say repairing a pallet is a very manual, uninteresting job, but when you connect the purpose of our share and reuse model and why we believe that has some real sustainable benefits to our customers and the environment, then you make that connection for people with their value set. Most people, I'm always amazed when I walk around our operation, they're not operations logistics people. They're actually people who care about sustainability and reducing waste and seeing those benefits to the wider environment and community. And so I think that's how we connect that sustainable purpose of why our business exists through to the work they do each day, and make, that sort of phrase around work worth doing come to life for them. So it's not easy, but that's what we try and promote through our channels. Excellent.
It's not easy. I mean, but being consistent, leading by example, as you mentioned, is critical. It's not just a policy. And I think that's over and over, it's got to come through in the DNA of everything you do, right, of your business. Chris, anything to add before going on to the next question? I've got a few coming in now, which is great.
Lisa, the only one I'd add, I think the gents hit on, social media is a great forum. The other thing we do, and I think it goes both ways, right? It's people wanting to come into our organization because of our values, but we want to make sure we get the right people coming into our organization. So we do rewards referral program, and always the best employees are employees that our employees referred to come in because they know our culture, they know how they're going to work. So we have a referral program, and that seems to work well. And I think we may need to lean on it even that much more in the coming days as the labor market gets tighter and tighter. But that's another forum for both, maybe it doesn't answer that question directly, but it's another forum for ensuring that people come in. And then when it's a referral program, then they get to know, they can talk to that person and know who we are and what we stand for and how we operate as an organization.
And just recognizing those behaviors. And, it really leads to the next question. Taking care of the soft stuff will ensure the hard stuff of business thrives. And, it goes back to people and empathy and really demonstrating that it's not just a policy. How will you be able to maintain this as the pressure of the future comes at you? And we've talked about the pressure. I mean, this whole conversation is how do you thrive through a constantly changing, challenging environment? How will you be able to maintain this as the pressure moves forward in this new normal? Maybe starting with you, Chris.
It's a great question. I think for us, if you grow, you're moving forward. If you don't grow or you stay stagnant, you're moving behind. So the one thing that we always want to do is continue to push and promote, grow, acquire, build out a brand and an organization that feels like people feel like they have a path to move forward with their career. Listen, and I think sometimes there's going to be honest and tough conversations, like there were honest and tough conversations during COVID for many people, right, as we went through this kind of journey. But again, being open when those things happen. But I think, again, really being positive, pushing and promoting growth. I think articulating as a leader what our vision is, where we want to go, what do we want to do, what's our why. I think those are the types of things, whether it's pre-pandemic, during pandemic, or post-pandemic, that are important to ensure. I know as an individual that I like to understand kind of, where we're going. Yeah, maybe I'm the CEO of the organization today, but that hasn't been my whole career. So when you have knowledge, you have intimacy, you have constant communication. I think all those levers are as important today, maybe even more important moving forward. So I don't know if that answers your question, Lisa, but that's kind of the way that I think about engaging as we head into the future with our organizations, and with potentially what could be some turmoil during these labor shortages and this bound backup of the world that we're living in today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If I can summarize, in that it's really, we have to bring our people with us to the decisions and really do that in a way that we think about that. And I think, in your description of what you just shared, it is absolutely that connection with people that brings us into the future. If you disconnect with that, then you're moving your business forward, but your business isn't moving with you to that success. Next question, maybe I'll go to Ryan for you. Safety requires personification. Really interesting example. If it is not felt or seen, and if it cannot be measured from a smiley face to stats, then it's only a SMS manual, not a program. It requires a 360-degree approach that it's driven by the front line people and supported through the lens of safety leadership. And you look at, as organizations are bigger, it's, making sure that it goes all through those levels to the front line of that same culture of safety and well-being. So how is the front line supported and valued in your businesses throughout this safety focus?
For us right now, I would have to say that the pandemic has really done something in terms of it really shapes your focus. Even as a business owner or business leader, it really directs it really hones it in. It really makes you realize what is valuable. And I really feel that if the frontline worker or team members can feel that, I talk about it in terms of empathy. You can probably hear in my voice a little bit in the last year and a half of how much I've realized and how much we invest into these people and how important they are. And they put the exact same amount of investment into the company. And like Chris and Mike were kind of alluding to, you're looking for the right people. We're the same thing. We have a referral program, and that's where some of our strongest team members have come from. People really promoting what's going on, and it really kind of slingshots your company forward because you're bringing somebody in that has an expectation. And when you have an expectation and a culture of expectation of something, and you direct that towards health and safety and you invest in it, I really feel that they can feel that from the company. And I feel through communication, through education, and through constant training, a true commitment to training and to education really allows them to give tools that they didn't realize that they had and how to deal with certain situations. In the form of not problem solving every single day. A lot of us are always putting out fires or always problem solving, but are we truly planning? And there's a difference between planning and problem solving. And that just doesn't go with leadership. And if we give some of the frontline workers skills to be able to plan and problem solve, and then you give them the training and the education, and then they feel supported through that and allow them to understand that they're allowed to make mistakes, that they're allowed to learn from those mistakes, and that they're supported through that, through patience, understanding, and empathy. And I feel that that really creates a program. And that's hard to do. It may sound easy, just through words, but you have to have a commitment towards it. And that comes from leadership, and that comes from all of our frontline right up through the top, and everybody having the same vision. And I think that that's really, really important leadership moving forward.
No, I think that's excellent. And I think the results speak for themselves. I know you were sharing your retention rate with me earlier some time ago, and it was just incredibly high. And it just, just the results speak for themselves is all I can say. Well over 90%. It was incredible. So Mike, do you think this very strict lockdown that New Zealand implemented will cause the country's economy to recover slower than other countries with less stringent rules?
Yeah, it's the big debate that's gone on for the last 6 months. I think. I mean, my general sense is yes. Yeah, I think the consensus is landing on that our approach at the start was very good, and it put us in a very good position when the pandemic started, and we were able to retain a lot of freedoms, and the economy was able to continue along, in a pretty good shape. So we didn't have that big dip of a recession that some other countries, had. And on the flip side, to the point, I think it is holding us back now, or is creating constraints within our environment. And it is starting to bite. We have a huge horticulture sector, for example, and a lot of seasonal workers and people that come through into that space that won't be able to enter our country and provide the workforce for that. We're seeing our tourism sector was 20% of our export earnings. That doesn't exist today. We only have a domestic tourism, and so how that international tourism sector builds back won't happen overnight. So I think, there's some real barriers to it. I guess the consensus is still on the fence, in terms of, we've taken a health response that has had some good stability and economic, but it probably is also going to slow down our ability to open up to the world again. I think that would be a fair position. But as we've seen with a lot of government policy and things, it's a quickly moving feast. In a month's time, these things could also change very quickly. So it's hard to sort of predict. And I think that's one of the challenges that businesses are facing to this is uncertainty. As we all know, that for planning and moving ahead with our strategies, people want certainty. And one of the handbrakes on a lot of investment and decisions is uncertainty around policy settings. So that might be another one that influences how strongly the economy recovers out the other side as well.
Yeah, it's not easy, for sure. And, that leads to the last question. I'll ask each of you, maybe in a minute each to wrap up. How do executive leaders cope with stress and anxiety at the workplace or even at personal levels? Because we don't leave our stress at work. So very briefly, each of you, how do you do it? Maybe starting with yourself, Chris.
Yeah, so for me, Lisa, I enjoy going to the gym. And I think it's just a way for me to relieve. I put on my earphones and I listen to music, and that's one way. I think keeping your body healthy is as important as anything else moving forward. I'd say the other thing is trying to put work down when you're at home too. It's tough. It can be really tough for some of us. You got your phone we're now completely interconnected, our personal lives and our work lives, right? So trying to mute that email or trying to create a culture whereby the weekends are our weekends and the evenings, to the most part, are our evenings can be tough. But that's another way I think that we can help our organizations, because for the most part, when you get an evening email or a weekend email or a text or something of that nature, unless it's critical, like there's a life or limb situation, most things can usually wait till Monday. So those are a couple of ways that I try my best to do. I'd say I'm better on the personal health side, and probably need to continue to work on putting that phone down when I'm away from work.
Thank you, Chris. Ryan.
For me, it's I think it's really important that you have a strong foundation at home. I think that's imperative, and I also think that, like Chris, I think you have to have something outside of work that's not, we're invested, we're passionate about what we do, but I think that you have to have something outside of work that you're just as passionate about, that allows you to kind of break away and get away. I think that's really, it's really important to really not allow yourself, like Chris mentioned, we're stuck to our phones, we're connected all the time, and it allows us to react at a moment's notice. But you have to be able to break away. You have to have some break at some point, and you have to have a solid foundation of people around you that can support you just as much. Because as much as we're leaders, like you and I have talked about, Lisa, we're human. So you have, I think those are imperative.
Yeah, no, we have to have the discipline to disconnect. Absolutely. And of course, finally with you, Mike, if you'd like to close that question.
Yeah, sure. And mine's probably a similar thing. I've got young kids, and young kids are a very easy way to check out of the realities of life and come down to some simple things that do it. So that's really important for me, that I do check out. And the other one that for me is important is the success or failure of my business is not driven solely by me. So I don't create all the success of our organization, and I'm not also the reason for all its failures. So I try and keep balance with that collectively sharing some of that and being open with my teams, and that is really important, and it helps me reduce the stress that it all sort of rises up to me as well. And that's not easy always, but I think it's an important sort of anchoring point for me.
Thank you. And thank you all. A big thank you to all of you as panelists here joining us and sharing your perspective with us. And as well to you, the audience, for being here today. We face many challenges with the changing landscape that continues every day. And how we deliver our decisions as leaders is a reflection of our values. I hope you'll join our key summary executive session shortly. Thank you all for joining us.